Pop. The sharp crack of skin on skin reverberated through first class. Freezing breath in throats, a single gasp rose like an alarm. Then nothing but stunned silence. What if one slap could unravel an entire airline? The title card flashes, flight attendant slaps black CEO's son. One call later, cut to the entryway of Royal Crest Flight 809, Los Angeles to New York. 16-year-old Owen Delgado steps onto the jet bridge as if he owns the sky, though his threadbare gray hoodie and scuffed sneakers say otherwise. He pauses, boarding pass in hand. 3C, inside, first class welcomes him with amber mood lighting and the whispered rustle of silk scarves. Overhead bins gleam like vaults. Leather armchairs glow under recessed LEDs. Passengers, men in tailored suits, women in ivory cashmere, glance up and immediately look away, their eyes asking the same question, what is he doing here? Owen breathes in, settling the edge of his backpack behind him. He loops on noise-canceling headphones, no playlist, just the quiet determination to belong. He eases into seat 3C, places his backpack gently overhead, and pulls out a slim paperback. Toni Morrison's words become his shield. But luxury isn't about comfort, it's a performance of power. And the lead performer has just arrived. Click-click of pristine heels on plush carpet heralds Bridget Sanders, head flight attendant. Her platinum bun is flawless, her uniform pressed to perfection. She carries a silver coffee thermos and a tablet. Her smile could launch 1,000 brands, until it falls short of her eyes. Those eyes find Owen, and the room tilts. She pauses directly in front of him. The hum of the cabin dims to a hush. Owen doesn't flinch. He reads her silent verdict, you don't belong here. Are you sure you're in the right seat? Bridget's tone is syrup, but brittle as ice. Owen lowers his book and locks gaze with her. Calm, yes. This is 3C. Her lips curve a courtesy that bites. May I see your ticket? He fishes the glossy boarding pass out and offers it. She inspects it as if it were forged parchment. Around them, first class collectively holds its breath. Traveling alone? She asks. Alone, Owen replies without hesitation. Bridget's eyebrow climbs. She glances at his hoodie, his bag, then her tablet. You've flown alone before? Several times. A flicker of doubt crosses her features, enough to crack her perfect veneer. Then, in one fluid motion, she makes her move. Before Owen can react, Bridget's hand strikes out, snapping his wrist and sending his phone skittering across the aisle. The slap lands with a sickening finality. Silence fractures into stifled whispers. A woman in row 1F grips her champagne flute. A man in 2A tightens his tie. But Owen stays seated, muscles unspooling tension. He watches her reclaim his phone, her power play complete. Then, almost imperceptibly, he taps his own screen. The icon appears blank to any onlooker, but it's the key to everything, internal QA app. A tiny red dot blinks, recording. No anger flares. No shout erupts. Owen simply stands, picks up his backpack, and walks toward the galley. Each step is heavy with quiet resolve. He doesn't look back. He doesn't need to. The echo of that slap will follow him. But so will the proof. The galley door closes. First class exhales, uneasy and exposed. Meanwhile, somewhere up front, an LED in the cockpit blinks, incident recorded. Initiating executive override. And the cabin, once a temple of unspoken privilege, knows it will never be the same. Owen Delgado stepped into the galley with the composure of a practiced traveler, though his heart was still pounding from the slapping echo in first class. The narrow corridor leading to the back cabin felt colder, harsher. Fluorescent strips overhead flickered, and the scent of disinfectant mingled with reheated coffee. He slid his backpack off one shoulder and leaned it against the stainless steel counter, a junior flight attendant, Taylor Ree, hovered nearby, her name tag reflecting the harsh light. She offered Owen a polite nod, but her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. In her mid-20s, Taylor had trained for months on service protocols, diversity seminars, and conflict de-escalation techniques. Yet nothing in her manuals prepared her for the sight of a teenager exiled from first class, book and headphones still in hand. "Sir, would you like water or something stronger?" Taylor asked, voice soft, too soft. He shook his head. "Water, please." She filled a cup and slid it across to him. Owen's fingers closed around it. He raised the rim, took a slow sip, and felt the cool liquid steady his pulse. Every gesture was deliberate. It was important that no one saw him rattled. In the corner, a narrow window offered a glimpse of the gleaming jet bridge and the tarmac beyond. Ground crews scurried like ants beneath a gray Los Angeles morning sky. Beyond that lay thousands of miles, the entire continent stretching ahead. He was riding a Boeing 77 across 2 time zones, from the palm-lined palm trees of LAX to the steel skyscrapers of JFK. But Owen was more than just another passenger. Under his hoodie lay a phone loaded with the airline's internal QA app, a discreet tool designed for insight to audits of crew performance. He tapped its icon, a plain gray square that to any casual observer looked like a games folder. In reality, it gave him executive override capabilities. His thumb hovered over the record button. He pressed it. Instantly, hidden cameras built into the ceiling above the main aisle and the galley counter began streaming to the airline's secure compliance servers. A soft red light blinked on each camera lens, visible only to those who knew where to look. Taylor's gaze flicked up, catching the tiny glow. Her lips parted for a moment, confusion crossing her face. Was he a whistleblower? An undercover inspector? She hesitated, as if torn between loyalty to protocol and the unsettling truth that she'd just witnessed a blatant act of prejudice in first class. Owen didn't avert his eyes. In fact, he met hers with a quick, steady nod, a silent reassurance that she was safe to bear witness. He set his cup down and leaned against the counter, unfolding a laminated route map of Flight 809. The charted path arced from Los Angeles to New York, grazing the Rocky Mountains before cutting across the plains. Beneath the map, a small placard reminded crew of operational discipline and passenger dignity, a bitter irony, Owen thought, given the morning's events. As the engines hummed, he closed his eyes for a moment and breathed deeply. He pictured the high-rise glass tower in Manhattan where his father's office sat, 40 floors above Wall Street, its windows reflecting a city that never slept. Jonathan Delgado was no absentee dad. He'd been the one to convince Owen to enroll in the company's internal audit program, hidden within the management training curriculum. "If you ever see injustice, don't just stand by," his father had said. "Use your seat at the table." Which made this fight more personal than privilege. It wasn't about first-class tickets or executive status. It was about every passenger, regardless of race or age or wardrobe, deserving respect. A chime erupted, sharp and distant, as the galley monitors blinked, Flight 809 passenger displacement event recorded. "Initiate review." Taylor shot Owen, a look half relief, half guilt. He offered a small, sympathetic smile. It was his way of saying, "You did the right thing." He slipped his phone back into his hoodie pocket, careful not to reveal the screen. "Thank you," he said softly, tipping his head toward Taylor. "For the water." She nodded, then blurted, "I'm so sorry you had to go back here. That didn't feel right." Her voice quivered on the last word. He folded his arms and regarded her warmly. It wasn't procedure. He paused, gauging her reaction. "You saw it too." Taylor swallowed. "I did." She ran a hand through her hair, then squared her shoulders. "I think I'm done pretending I didn't see. If anyone asks, I want to help fix this." Owen nodded again, gratitude shining in his eyes. He had no illusions that one attitude adjustment from a junior attendant would change a corporate culture, but it was a start. A seed planted in the fertile ground of first-hand witness. Behind them, the galley phone rang, its shrill tone echoing off stainless steel. Taylor looked toward it, and then back to Owen. "You should be." He raised a hand. "It's okay. I'll answer." Without waiting for her, he picked up the handset. A clipped voice on the other end said, "Sir, this is Captain Ree Hammond. Please remain at your current location. You're needed for a statement regarding the incident in first class." Owen's heart thumped. This was the next phase of the plan, the moment his internal QA status would come fully into play. He cleared his throat and said, "Understood, Captain. I'll be right there." He hung up and turned to Taylor. "I need to go," he said gently. "Thank you again." She managed to nod, eyes brimming. "Good luck." As Owen strode toward the cockpit door, he felt a quiet surge of anticipation. This was his purpose, to shine a light on hidden biases, to press recording buttons where no one else dared. The soft LED blink on his phone was proof that the system would no longer let such prejudice slide. Around him, the back cabin settled into its usual rhythm, tray tables clicking into place, seatbelts fastening. But the undercurrent had shifted. Now, every creak of the aisle floor, every echo of hard-soled shoes carried the weight of accountability. And somewhere behind the cockpit door, Flight 809's compliance protocols were awakening, ready to deliver justice in real time. Owen Delgado eased back into his seat, 3C, the soft leather pressing against him like a silent invitation. Yet the cabin remained anything but welcoming. He opened his Toni Morrison novel, but the words washed over him as noise. Around him, first class was in motion. A flight attendant topped off a glass of sparkling water at table 1A. Another handed out hot towels trimmed in gold embroidery. Everything was refined, polished, curated, except for him. A hush fell when Owen slipped on his noise-canceling headphones, not to play music, but to signal his intent. He belonged here. A ripple of whisper ran through the cabin. Two women in cashmere cardigans exchanged furtive looks. A bespectacled man pretended to read a tax report while his eyes darted Owen's way. And a silver-haired couple in seats 2B and 2C stiffened, as if his presence unsettled the equilibrium they'd paid a small fortune to maintain. He took a steadying breath, pulling the novel open to the marked page. Before he could focus, a soft click echoed from the aisle. All eyes shifted, and Owen knew who it was without looking. Bridget Sanders walked in, clipboard in hand and heels clicking like a metronome. Her platinum blonde bun was as precise as her posture, shoulders back, chin high. She surveyed the cabin with an air of ownership. And when her gaze found Owen, it zeroed in. He felt the weight of her stare in his chest. She paused beside seat 3C. The overhead light seemed to dim, as though the entire cabin bent around this moment. Her practiced half-smile appeared, but never reached her eyes. That smile told the real story. Bridget didn't see a passenger. She saw an anomaly. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" she asked, voice soft but edged with something sharper, doubt, perhaps, or thinly veiled disapproval. Owen closed his book, marked the page, and met her calmly. "Yes. I'm in 3C, he replied, voice measured. A ripple ran through the rows. In seat 1F, a woman's hand tightened on her purse strap. In 2A, a man's gaze flickered between Owen's hoodie and the glossy boarding pass he still held. Not a single person offered assistance. No one asked what was happening. No one intervened. The only sound was the whir of air vents and the faint hiss of overhead compartments closing. Bridget's brow arched. She glanced at his hoodie, then lifted her perfume-scented wrist to her nose, as if the hint of fabric out of place required confirmation. She extended her hand. "Please show me your ticket." Owen reached into his pocket and produced the boarding pass. The cabin held its breath while Bridget studied the printed code, 3C, and his name, Owen Delgado. He held the pass steadily between two fingers. He knew every second mattered. Gentle audience interaction. Have you ever felt out of place in a room where everyone else seemed to belong? Drop a comment below, your story matters. Bridget's lips curved in a polite nod, the kind that masks contempt. Traveling alone? Owen glanced around. No one offered a reassuring smile. Not a child in the row behind him. Not a businesswoman sipping her green tea. Not the lone man scrolling through financial charts. Their silence was loud. He met Bridget's gaze again. Yes. Alone. She tapped her tablet, as though confirming his innocence would require an extra data point. You've flown first class unaccompanied before? He shrugged, a simple gesture. A few times. Bridget's eyes lingered on his worn sneakers, as if they'd betrayed him. Then she looked at her tablet and back at Owen. Thank you. Her tone was dismissive, but the thank you carried a sting. She'd thanked him for confirming what she already presumed. A burst of pre-recorded chime from an overhead speaker sliced the tension. The crew in the back cabin responded almost mechanically. But in first class, nobody moved. Even the flight attendants paused mid-step. They'd all witnessed the quiet interrogation. They all felt its weight. Owen tucked the boarding pass into his pocket, closed his book, and exhaled softly. He braced his hand on the armrest, fingertips grazing the edge of his phone, hidden, but ready. The tiny LED of his internal QA app blinked red, a silent promise that every moment of prejudice was being documented. Bridget gave a final glance, smoothing down her uniform jacket as if resetting her authority. With a slight incline of her head, she turned and walked away, heels clicking, the code of discipline she wielded so well. As her footsteps faded, the cabin exhaled collectively, an exhale laced with guilt, curiosity, and that unsettling thrill of unsaid judgment. Owen settled back and slipped on his headphones, this time pressing play on ambient noise. He opened his novel again, but this time he read the words with a heightened awareness. Every line mirrored the story unfolding around him. His gaze drifted to the other passengers, the retired couple now avoiding eye contact, the business traveler still flying through spreadsheets, the young woman softly dabbing lip gloss. Each bore a silent question. What should I have done? The question hung in the air, heavy as the amber lighting. Through his headphones, he listened to the hush, the subtle shuffling of instinctive conscience. He thought of his father's words. Use your seat at the table. Demand respect. Not with anger, but with presence. Owen repositioned himself and tapped the record button on his phone one more time, ensuring there would be no doubt. A formal, digital imprint of the cabin's collective silence. Then he leaned back, closed his eyes against the window's deep blue, and waited. Because in that pregnant pause, before any voice rose in protest or apology, the real story was being written. A story of quiet defiance. Of implacable dignity. Of the first crack in a wall of unspoken prejudice. Owen Delgado sat rigid in seat 3C. The supple leather now felt more like a spotlight than a sanctuary. His heart thudded against his ribs, each beat louder than the cabin's hushed hum. Above him, the amber lights glowed warmly, but the air crackled with unease. Every passenger in first class had frozen, mid-sip, mid-scroll. Their eyes flicked between Owen and the aisle, as if waiting for the next act in an unspoken drama. Bridget Sanders glided back into the scene. Clipboard in hand. Authority radiating from her posture to her heels. She paused beside Owen's seat, the corners of her mouth quirking into that same practiced half-smile. Welcoming in form, icy in intent. Owen looked up, meeting her gaze without flinching. He could feel the collective stare of 6 well-heeled travelers pricking his skin. Mr. Delgado, Bridget began, voice buttery smooth, I'm going to need you to. She stopped mid-sentence, as though reconsidering how best to verbalize her unspoken suspicion. She tapped a finger against her tablet. Her eyes slid from the screen to Owen's hoodie, then to his worn sneakers, each imperfection a clue confirming, in her mind, that he didn't fit this cabin script. Owen's pulse quickened. He lifted his chin. A silent assertion that he belonged here, as much as anyone. He knew that dignity was a weapon in itself. One that didn't require shouting. Yet he could taste the tension in the air, the faint, coppery tang of adrenaline, and beyond it, the low drone of engines, reminding him just how many miles separated him from the ground. Bridget's lips curved with practiced courtesy. "Would you mind confirming your seat number for me?" she asked, extending the boarding pass back toward him with slow, deliberate precision. He retrieved it from his jacket pocket, keeping his voice calm. 3C, he said. She stared at the pass for a long moment, as if the ink might change if she willed it to. Then. "And this ticket is valid for today's flight only?" He nodded. "That's correct." A flicker of impatience crossed her eyes. She tapped the screen again, a gesture less about protocol and more about power. "Are you traveling alone? No adult accompanying you?" Owen shifted in his seat, caught off guard. The question's insinuation struck him. Minors rarely flew unaccompanied in first class. And yet, here he was. He met her gaze squarely. "Yes. I'm traveling alone." She pursed her lips. "Do you have proof of parental consent? Or perhaps an emergency contact?" Her tone carried a veneer of concern, but Owen sensed the challenge beneath. A quiet provocation dressed as policy. His breath caught. He reached into his hoodie and pulled out a simple slip of paper. His father's signature. A phone number. A formality, prepared in advance, just in case. "Here," he said, offering it. "My father's contact information." Bridget accepted the paper, but didn't look at it. Instead, she tapped her tablet a few more times. Then, without meeting his eye, she pressed her fingertip to the edge of the overhead bin. Click. The compartment unlocked. She motioned delicately. "Please retrieve your carry-on from here and follow me to the galley." The hush in first class deepened. The air itself seemed to pause. Into a thick blanket of discomfort. Owen's stomach twisted. The command hadn't been spoken outright, but it echoed loudly, prejudice, masquerading as policy. No technical glitch. No genuine safety concern. And yet, it carried the weight of a formal eviction. He swallowed hard and stood. As he unstrapped his backpack, a soft red LED winked at him from the corner of his phone screen. Recording in progress. He had reactivated the internal QA app, aware that every moment mattered. The app silently archived both audio and video, captured by his microphone, by the cabin's hidden compliance cameras. Owen squared his shoulders and met Bridget's eyes one last time before turning away. He slid his bag from the bin and slung it over his shoulder. From the far corner, Taylor, the junior attendant from the galley, watched silently. Her expression flickered between empathy and fear. Owen offered her a small nod. Gratitude shining in his eyes. He turned down the aisle, the plush carpet beneath his feet suddenly oppressive. Under this exposure, it felt like it gave way, softness weaponized. Every step an accusation. Passengers remained pinned in their seats like deer caught in headlights. An elderly man in row 2 stared straight ahead, pretending not to see. The woman in 4C's knuckles whitened around her champagne flute. A phone camera flickered into view for a split second, then vanished. No one spoke up. No one offered assistance. When Owen reached the galley door, he paused. Glanced back. 3C. Empty now. A vacant leather seat that looked more like a throne of shame than comfort. He had been sent away. Not because of anything he had done, but because of who he was. Because someone decided he didn't fit the mold. But he refused to let that define him. He tapped the keypad beside the door. The lock disengaged, and he stepped through, the door sliding shut behind him with quiet finality. Inside, harsh fluorescent light washed the cramped galley in clinical white. The scent of disinfectant and reheated coffee clung to the air, a jarring contrast to the amber warmth of first class. Taylor hovered nearby, a stack of plastic cups in her hand. Her eyes brimmed with unspoken questions. Owen cleared his throat. "Thank you," he said softly. "For witnessing that." Her gaze dropped to the red LED on his phone. "I saw it," she whispered. I'm sorry." He nodded. "You're not the only one who should apologize." His voice was steady. Calm. But the truth hung in the air like static. "This moment matters. It's real." Taylor's lower lip trembled. "I don't know what to say," she admitted. "Just say you saw," Owen replied. "That's enough." He leaned against the galley counter as the phone rang, a sharp trill that pierced the stillness. He glanced at Taylor, then picked up. "Captain Hammond," he said, voice clear. "I'm on my way." He replaced the handset. Met Taylor's eyes. "Ready?" She inhaled deeply, squared her shoulders. "Yes." Together, they stepped toward the cockpit, leaving the sterile glow of the galley behind. Outside, the engines hummed, steady, distant. Flight 809 was still bound for New York. But nothing about this journey would ever be the same. Back in first class, a hush had descended, heavier than any blanket. Owen Delgado sat rigid in seat 3C. The leather armrest pressed against his side like a dare. The polished metal fixtures gleamed overhead, reflections catching like watchful eyes. Somewhere above, the engines purred, a reminder that they had long since left terra firma. But in that moment, the only ground he felt was the cold certainty of Bridget Sanders' gaze. She approached again. Unwavering poise. Clipboard in one perfectly manicured hand. The other hovered over her tablet, as if scanning invisible lines of code that quietly declared his unworthiness. Her platinum bun was immaculate. Her uniform, pristine. To any other passenger, she was the epitome of control. Flight deck authority to Owen. She was the barrier between dignity and disgrace. "Show me your phone," she said, voice low, almost conversational, yet laced with steel. He hesitated only for a heartbeat, the tiny LED red glow in his hoodie pocket catching her eye. She mistook it for defiance. Before he could respond, her hand snapped out. The slap came with surgical precision, skin on skin, and it rattled through the cabin like a starting gun. Bap! A collective gasp erupted. A silver-haired businessman in 2's jaw dropped. A woman 2 rows back clutched her pearls. Owen's hand jerked from the armrest, his phone toppled onto the aisle carpeting with a quiet clatter. For a suspended second, the world stilled. Then instinct warred with restraint. The passengers watched, transfixed, as Bridget pinched the phone between thumb and forefinger, her expression unreadable. Owen didn't cry out. His chest rose and fell in a slow, controlled inhale. He didn't snatch the phone back. Didn't raise his voice. Didn't make a scene. Instead, he pressed his lips together, folded his shoulders back, and stood. He slipped his backpack from the overhead bin, its strap whispering across the carpet. The worn fabric carried the faint scent of old books and road dust, the scent of home. He slung it over one shoulder with graceful deliberation. Around him, the cabin held its collective breath. A flight attendant in row 1F muttered something under her breath. Another passenger reached for a napkin but faltered. Nobody moved to help. Silence was their complicity. Owen dropped a polite nod toward Bridget, who now held his phone at arm's length as though examining an exhibit. She didn't meet his eyes. With steady fingers, he retrieved his phone from her grasp. The screen glowed. The internal QA app had recorded every frame of the incident, from Bridget's narrowed eyes to the hush of shocked onlookers. He pressed the share icon. They slapped me and sent me to the back. No exclamation points. No emojis. No flourish. Just the stark, undeniable truth. The message flew through the airline's secure compliance network, and into the hands of executives, compliance officers, and, most importantly, his father. On board, the cabin's atmosphere shifted imperceptibly, like a breeze slipping beneath a door seal. Somewhere behind the cockpit door, an alert chimed, "Incident report received." Owen gathered his composure. He didn't glance around at the stunned faces. He didn't murmur an apology or a defense. He simply walked. Each step down the aisle was measured, dignified, a quiet assertion that he belonged here just as much as any millionaire in a tailored suit. At the galley entrance, Taylor re-waited, her face pale, eyes wide. Owen paused and offered her a small, encouraging smile. "Thank you for witnessing that," he said softly. She swallowed, nodding. I saw it." He lifted a hand in farewell and stepped through the door, sliding it shut behind him with a final click. First class exhaled. The amber lights felt suddenly colder. The upholstery's warmth turned to memory. Passengers shifted in their seats, as though physically moved by guilt and uncertainty. Owen leaned against the galley's stainless steel counter, heart still racing, but spirit intact. Taylor hovered, the emergency light overhead casting a sterile glow. He pulled his phone from his pocket and tapped the app's status screen. A string of alerts flashed. Ground Flight 809 at gate. Suspend crew. All crew IDs. Initiate full incident review. He closed the app, slipping the phone back into his hoodie as though carrying a secret. In that moment, the galley wasn't just a cramped work area. It was the epicenter of consequence. Taylor sat down a cup of water, then paused. "What happens now?" she asked. Voice trembling, Owen studied her for a beat. "Now," he said, "we wait for them to follow the rules they preach." He gestured toward the narrow corridor leading back to first class. "I need to give a statement," Taylor nodded. "I'll come with you," she offered. He appreciated the solidarity. "Thank you." They stepped toward the cockpit door together, the fluorescent lights overhead humming a different tune than the amber glow of first class. Each footstep echoed not just in the metal corridor but in the collective conscience of everyone on board. Because one slap had become more than a moment of humiliation. It had become a spark. And in the hush that followed, every passenger felt its heat. A faint buzz cut through the low drone of the conference room's air conditioning. Jonathan Delgado glanced up from the podium mid-presentation to see his phone lighting up on the mahogany table. The slide behind him tracked quarterly expansion metrics, prospects in the Middle East, rising fuel costs, shareholder projections. But his mind snapped to that single line of text blinking on his screen. "They slapped me and sent me to the back." His heart skipped. The words were simple. 6-word truth from his son Owen, riding silently in the back cabin of Flight 809. As CEO with a 25% stake in Royal Crest Airlines, Jonathan had to balance every call, market moves, investor demands, regulatory filings. Yet this call was different. It was personal. He tapped the screen, activating the secure compliance portal. Instantly, multiple feeds opened, a crisp high-definition video of Bridget Sanders' hand striking Owen's wrist, the silent shock of first class, the shift to the cramped galley. Simultaneously, automated compliance alerts popped up. Ground Flight 809 at gate. Suspend crew. All IDFs. Initiate full incident review. In the hushed, wood-paneled boardroom, directors exchanged uncertain glances. The head of external affairs swallowed, as if preparing to speak. But Jonathan raised a hand. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said, voice calm but resolute, "but this matter takes precedence." He tapped another icon. A secure audio channel lit up. "Captain Hammond, this is Jonathan Delgado. Hold your position at the gate. Do not close cabin doors or taxi until further notice." He turned back to the room. "I understand this will delay the flight. We'll handle any customer complaints tomorrow. Right now, our priority is the integrity of our service. And the dignity of every passenger." A director cleared her throat. "Sir, may I ask why so drastic?" Jonathan folded his arms. "Because a single slap carries more meaning than any spreadsheet." He pocketed his phone and picked up the remote. The slide behind him shifted to a simple statement. "Service with respect." The contrast between the glossy marketing slogan and the morning's ugly reality was unmistakable. Meanwhile, at 20,000 feet above the Rockies, Captain Ree Hammond sat in the cockpit of Flight 809 reviewing pre-flight data. The autopilot was set. Cabin crew had confirmed safety checks. The engines hummed a steady rhythm. Just as he reached to dismiss a routine alert, a red indicator flashed on the compliance panel. "Flight grounded. Executive override." He frowned, tapped the indicator, and picked up the intercom handset. "Flight 809 to cabin crew," he called, keeping his tone neutral. "Remain at your stations. We're holding at the gate. Expect further instructions from operations." His first officer raised an eyebrow but said nothing. Protocol dictated unquestioning compliance with an executive override. Captain Hammond took a deep breath. In his 30-plus years flying widebody jets, he'd never experienced a command like this. No technical issue. No security threat. This was an ethical directive, from the highest level. Back in first class, overhead bins were closed. And a hush fell again. Passengers glanced at one another, confused. Their elite sanctuary had just been transformed into a paused theater. The cabin monitors flickered, a discreet message scrolled in the bottom corner of every digital seat screen. "Due to an executive compliance review, Flight 809 will remain at the gate. We apologize for the inconvenience." Bridget Sanders stood near the front galley, her coffee cup long gone cold in her hand. She stared at her tablet, where her crew status had flipped from active to suspended pending review. Her eyes widened as the magnitude dawned. The system she trusted more than any rulebook had betrayed her. In the back cabin, Owen sat reclined against the plastic panel by the restroom. He watched through his small window as ground crew began to disconnect the jet bridge. He'd expected some reaction, but not this level of authority. A quiet satisfaction settled in his chest. Gentle audience interaction. If you were on that flight, how would you have reacted to an unexpected delay like this? Share below. Your thoughts matter. Taylor Reed hovered just outside the galley, clipboard in hand. She met Owen's eye and offered a small, relieved smile. He nodded once, acknowledging her silent support. It was a reminder that the most powerful revolutions often begin with quiet solidarity. Up in the cockpit, Captain Hammond sat back, reviewing the incident footage streaming on his secure tablet. He studied the angles, the injustice of a privilege-driven slap, the brute silence of onlookers, and most of all, a teenage boy refusing to cry out. He tapped the screen to enlarge Owen's composed face. "First class," the captain murmured to himself, "just got a lesson." On the tarmac below, passengers started to unfurl seat belts, stretch limbs, and exchange murmured observations. Some tapped their watches. Others reached for headphones. The rarity of the delay heightened the tension, but also the sense that something significant was unfolding. In the operations center back in New York, compliance officers convened around a glowing video wall. Richard Lane, the COO, watched Owen's calm departure from first class and the subsequent galley interaction. He turned to the compliance lead. Prepare a full behavioral review for Bridget Sanders and schedule immediate bias awareness training for all first-class crew. A click of a pen, and the orders were out. Richard leaned back. Even in corporate corridors, a single smartphone could trigger seismic change. As Flight 809 remained tethered to the gate, Jonathan Delgado returned to his boardroom, closing the presentation deck. He looked out at the city skyline, the same city where hours ago he'd been projecting growth charts. Now he was charting a different course, one of accountability, respect, and the quiet power of teenage resolve. When he stepped from the boardroom, shareholders were buzzing in small clusters. Jonathan raised his hand. "Let's remember," he said softly, "service with respect isn't just a slogan. It's the foundation of everything we stand for, especially when it's hardest to uphold." Somewhere in the back of Flight 809, Owen pressed his headphones back on, opened his book, and leaned his head against the window. The world around him was paused, but justice, once set in motion, never remains idle. The tannoy crackled overhead, soft but unmistakable. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We remain at the gate pending further instructions from company leadership. We apologize for the delay." A ripple of murmurs surged through first class. Champagne flutes were abandoned midair. Newspapers rustled like agitated birds. An elderly couple in 2B exchanged puzzled glances. For many, a grounded flight meant inconvenience. For others, it whispered something more profound: the machinery of privilege had stalled. Bridget Sanders stood by the galley door, cradling her now cold coffee like a shield. She lifted the cup to her lips and sipped, savoring the warmth in her mouth even as her heart pounded with dread. Unexpected authority had turned against her, and the bitter liquid matched her mood. She glanced at her crew status on the tablet, suspended pending review. A knot of shame tightened her stomach. For years she'd believed her power was bulletproof. Today, it had backfired spectacularly. Taylor Ree hovered nearby, tray in hand. Her polished smile faltered as she watched passengers' reactions. She'd seen firsthand Owen's dignified exit, the way he'd stood calm and unafraid, backpack slung over one shoulder as though nothing had happened. Taylor's training manual echoed in her mind: maintain professional composure. But her composure had cracked. She set the tray down with a clatter that drew Bridget's gaze. "Taylor," Bridget said quietly, voice brittle, "check with the cockpit, confirm exactly how long we're held here." She attempted an air of control, but the tremor in her tone betrayed her. Taylor met Bridget's eyes and saw more than the authoritative uniform. She saw a woman caught in the glare of her own mistake. "Yes," Taylor replied softly, stepping toward the galley phone. She lifted the handset, glancing at Owen out of the corner of her eye. He remained seated by the back galley door, flipping through Morrison's novel as if the whole spectacle were just another page in a book. It was the sight of his unbroken composure that made Taylor's throat constrict. While Bridget watched Taylor dial, a middle-aged businessman in 1C cleared his throat and addressed the cabin. "Excuse me," he began, voice surprisingly steady, "does anyone know what's happening?" His question hung in the air, pressing on everyone's shoulders. No one moved to answer. The silence seized the moment, and Taylor felt the weight of it more keenly than anyone. She returned to Bridget with the cockpit's response. "Indefinite delay, ma'am. Operations is reviewing the incident." She set the phone down with a soft click. Bridget's shoulders sagged. She stared at the first-class rows, her rows, filled with bewildered faces. "Very well," she said, lifting her coffee again. She drank deeply, as if to swallow her pride along with the coffee's final drop. Taylor swallowed her own guilt. At that moment, she realized that rules meant nothing if you never questioned the person enforcing them. She stepped closer to Bridget. "Ma'am, may I suggest offering the passengers complimentary refreshments?" It might ease tensions. Bridget blinked, surprised by Taylor's tactful assertiveness. She nodded once, stiffly. Yes. Yes, do that. She motioned for Taylor to proceed. Taylor squared her shoulders and turned to the cabin, voice warm but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, while we await further instructions, we'd like to offer you freshly brewed coffee, tea, or juice. Please allow us a moment to prepare it for you. Her tone carried genuine regret and a hint of empathy, qualities absent moments ago. Passengers exchanged glances and began to respond. A woman in 2F smiled appreciatively. Thank you, she said softly. A retired into the mic, any update on the review? He listened for a moment and then sighed. Understood, thank you. He set the headset down and turned to his first officer. I've never seen anything like this. The first officer shrugged. Executive override is absolute, sir. Back in the galley, Taylor moved with quiet efficiency, brewing fresh coffee in silver carafes, pouring juice into crystal glasses. She balanced each tray with care, her earlier hesitation replaced by purpose. For every coffee she offered, she caught Bridget's eye, urging her to lead the apology. But Bridget stood rooted by the counter, coffee cup still in hand, humiliation and pride warring on her face. Owen watched the exchange from his seat. He'd slipped off his headphones to listen, to witness not just the fallout but the flicker of compassion in Taylor's actions. He knew change came slowly, step by step, person by person. His phone lay mute in his pocket, the recording safely transmitted. Now he allowed himself a small, encouraging smile at Taylor's resolve. Moments later, a young couple in 3A accepted a tray from Taylor. The woman's eyes shone with unshed tears. Thank you, dear, she whispered. At least someone cares. Taylor nodded, voice gentle. I do, and I'm sorry for what happened here. Her apology, though not official, carried more weight than any scripted statement. It was human. Owen closed his book and stood, approaching Bridget and Taylor. The cabin fell into a respectful hush. Even the engine's drone seemed to dip in volume. He paused before Bridget, eyes steady and calm. Bridget Sanders, he said, voice soft but clear, thank you for offering coffee to everyone. It's a start. Then he turned to Taylor. Thank you for standing up. Taylor's breath caught. She exhaled shakily and mustered a nod. Bridget looked at them both, her cup trembling in her hand. For the first time, she saw not just a teenager in a hoodie, but a figure of quiet resilience and genuine leadership in Taylor, a young attendant trying to do the right thing. The realization struck her hard. In that charged silence, the cabin became something more than a collection of seats. It became a community reckoning with its own conscience. First class paused at the gate was no longer about privilege, it was about accountability. Owen returned to his seat as Taylor returned to the galley, and Bridget finally set her coffee down on the counter. She ran a hand through her hair and spoke into the hush. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Royal Crest Airlines, I apologize for the inconvenience and the injustice you have witnessed. We are addressing the issue, and I hope to serve you better. Her voice wavered, but it was real. Passengers nodded, some offering quiet applause. The retired gentleman in 2B lifted his newspaper again, this time folding it neatly. A woman in 4C dabbed a tear from her cheek, then smiled at Owen in 3C, the boy who forced them all to look. As Taylor cleared the last empty tray, Owen let the hum of the engines wrap around him. The journey was still on hold, but something more profound had already taken flight, a turn toward empathy and change. A soft chime rang through the cabin, a signal none of the passengers had heard before. The cockpit door slid open, and Captain Ree Hammond stood framed in the doorway, his expression serious. Behind him, the muted glow of instrument panels cast long shadows across the aisles. Bridget Sanders, clutching her now empty coffee cup, froze in the galley. Her polished composure cracked as she realized this was no routine announcement. Taylor Reed glanced at her with sympathetic urgency. "You're needed up front, ma'am," she whispered. Bridget's knees felt weak. She took a steadying breath, smoothed her uniform jacket as she walked toward the cockpit, each step echoing like a countdown against her previous confidence. Passengers in first class watched in rapt silence. No one stirred, no one offered support. She had commanded their obedience all morning, now she approached on her own summons. Inside the cockpit, the sterile hum of navigation screens and the faint scent of avionics grease filled the air. Richard Lane, the chief operating officer, stood beside Captain Hammond. His crisp suit and stern posture flipped Bridget's world upside down. She stepped in, hands trembling at her sides. "Bridget Sanders," Richard began, voice cool and precise, "thank you for joining us." He gestured to the co-pilot seat. "Please have a seat." Bridget swallowed and lowered herself into the seat. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a gavel striking a bench. The cabin's distant shimmer, the murmurs of flight attendants, and the tension down the aisle all fell away. This was a chamber of judgment. Richard swiveled his tablet toward her. A freeze frame of Owen Delgado's calm face appeared superimposed over the blur of shocked onlookers below. It scrolled lines of compliance code, unauthorized physical contact, violation of passenger dignity protocol. Bridget's breath caught in her throat. She recognized Owen's name in the lower corner. Owen Delgado, internal QA intern. For the record, Richard said, eyes locked on hers, Owen Delgado is no ordinary passenger. He's been embedded in our internal quality assurance program with executive override clearance reserved for the CEO and his designees. Bridget's mind raced. She'd assumed he was just a kid in a hoodie, an anomaly to be removed. Instead, he was an inspector empowered to expose any breach of policy. Richard continued, "You did not verify his ticket properly. You did not report the incident through the correct channels. Instead, you allowed personal prejudice to dictate your actions and publicly humiliated a valid passenger." Bridget's hands clenched the armrests. The heat in her cheeks rose as she recalled the slap, how her hand had arced through the air, how the cabin had recoiled. She wanted to speak to defend herself with rehearsed words about procedure and safety, but the cold authority in Richard's gaze froze her. He tapped the screen and a second video slid into view, Owen's measured walk down the aisle, the barely audible BAP echo of the slap, and the flash of a red LED on a hidden camera. "Because of one text message," Richard said, "the entire Flight 809 crew has been suspended pending a full review." His voice was controlled but carried an undercurrent of disappointment. "This is not up for debate." Bridget closed her eyes for a moment, the room tilting. The uniform she'd worn for decades, the symbol of her authority, felt like a shackle. She saw instead the faces of the first-class cabin, those she had commanded, who had silently watched her abuse that command. When she opened her eyes, Richard was waiting. "Do you understand the gravity of your actions?" he asked. She swallowed, voice trembling. I understand." "Good," he said, his tone softening infinitesimally. "Now you will return to the cabin and publicly apologize to Owen Delgado in front of the passengers you wronged. You will escort him back to his seat and acknowledge your mistake." Bridget's throat tightened. The public nature of this demand was a dagger to her pride, but her own reflection in the cockpit's glass window stared back at her, an image of a woman forced to confront her worst self. "I will," she whispered. "Failure to comply will result in your immediate removal from Royal Crest Airlines," Richard added. There was no malice in his words, only the unwavering enforcement of the standard she had abandoned. Captain Hammond stepped forward. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "they're waiting." Bridget drew a shuddering breath and stood. The cockpit door opened again, and the cold flood of first-class light washed over. Her passengers sat up straighter as she emerged, her head bowed. Taylor stepped aside to let her pass, eyes brimming with compassion. A hush fell so complete it swallowed the soft click of her heels. Bridget paused at the threshold, heart hammering. She looked toward Owen, still seated in 3C, headphones around his neck, expression composed and watchful. She lifted her gaze to meet his. The cabin leaned in. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice unsteady at first, "I owe you an apology. This morning, I acted out of personal bias instead of following procedure. I was wrong to question Mr. Delgado's place here, and I am sorry for the humiliation I caused." Her words trembled through the cabin like ripples on a pond. No one clapped, no one cheered, instead, a respectful silence deepened, a communal exhale born of accountability. She approached Owen, extending his boarding pass with both hands. "Mr. Delgado, please accept my apology and let me escort you back to your seat." Owen rose gracefully, the slightest nod acknowledging her sincerity as he took the pass. Bridget walked beside him down the aisle, a path reversed from hours ago. Passengers watched quietly, some wiping tears, some bowing heads. At the galley door, Owen paused and met Bridget's gaze. "Thank you for doing the right thing," he said softly. She blinked back tears. "Thank you for holding me accountable," she replied. He stepped into first class and she followed, handing him back to his rightful place. As he settled into 3C, the cabin exhaled once more, not in relief but in reverence for a moment when power yielded to principle. High above the clouds, Flight 809's engines roared back to life, carrying a humbled crew and a silent teenage sentinel whose quiet authority had reshaped an entire airline. Bridget Sanders stood at the threshold of the first-class cabin, her heart drumming in her chest like a warning bell. The amber lights gleamed off leather armrests and polished wood panels as every passenger turned their gaze toward her. No one stirred beneath their cashmere shawls or adjusted their silk scarves, the entire cabin held its collective breath. In her hand, Bridget clutched Owen Delgado's boarding pass like a lifeline, and a confession. She cleared her throat. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, voice steady but soft, "I owe you an apology." Her words floated over the rows, punctuated by the faint hiss of the air vents. "This morning, I let my personal prejudices dictate my actions. I questioned Mr. Delgado's right to this seat without any valid reason. I humiliated him in front of you all, and for that, I am truly sorry." A hush more profound than any lull fell across the cabin. A woman in 2B dabbed at her eyes with a monogrammed napkin. A man in 1A folded his stock report and set it down, head bowed. Bridget drew in a shaky breath, swallowing pride and fear in a single gulp, then continued. "Mr. Delgado, would you please join me so I can escort you back to 3C? Owen rose, his hoodie hanging loose but his shoulders straight as a ruler. He nodded once, a gesture of acknowledgement rather than triumph. Passengers watched his slow ascent with reverence. Even the flight attendants had paused mid-service to bear witness. As he stepped onto the aisle carpet, Bridget met his eyes. No anger there, only the weight of accountability. Together, they walked down the aisle, each footstep echoed like a verdict clattering softly against the plush carpet. Bridget kept pace beside him, offering silent support rather than command. She didn't reach out to touch his arm, her apology had already spoken. Owen's backpack swung gently at his side, a symbol of the burden he had carried and the quiet dignity he never lost. When they reached seat 3C, Owen paused and turned to face Bridget. The cabin leaned in. He placed a hand on the empty armrest and fixed her with a steady gaze. "You said this was an inconvenience," he said, voice calm but carrying a quiet force, "but a public slap and banishment, that's not inconvenience. It's injustice." His words rippled through the rows. A silver-haired couple in 2C exchanged glances as though waking from a stupor. The woman gripped her husband's arm, tears brimming in her eyes. A younger businessman in 1D straightened his tie and swallowed hard. None of them could meet Owen's gaze, not out of shame, but out of newfound understanding. Bridget closed her eyes for a heartbeat. When she opened them, she met Owen's unwavering stare. "You're right," she whispered. "It was injustice. I am so sorry." She stepped aside to allow him back into his seat, and the woman who once wielded power over him now stood humbled. Owen lowered himself into 3C, buckled his seatbelt, and set his book on the tray table. He didn't need to say more, the simple click of the belt echoed as validation around him. Passengers seemed to shift, releasing a collective sigh. The murmur of reclaimed respect rose gently, for Owen, for truth, for a moment when privilege yielded to principle. Bridget lingered at the back of the cabin, eyes damp. Taylor reapproached quietly, offering the discarded coffee cup as a small gesture of solidarity. Bridget took it, pressing the rim to her lips, tasting humility in its bitterness. She met Taylor's gaze and managed a nod, an unspoken promise to carry this lesson forward. In the front rows, the elderly gentleman in 1B cleared his throat. "May I just say," he paused, searching for composure. "Thank you for doing the right thing." A ripple of quiet agreement spread as others voiced their own gratitude. No loud applause, but soft exhalations of relief and respect filled the space. The cabin resumed life, magazines flipping open, champagne glasses refilled, napkins unfolding. Something intangible had shifted. First class was no longer a chamber of silent judgment, it had become a community of witnessed accountability. Owen's headphones lay unused around his neck, a testament to the power of presence over noise. High above the clouds, Flight 809's engines hummed a steady rhythm. In 3C, Owen Delgado closed his eyes and inhaled deeply, not out of resignation, but quiet triumph. Justice had arrived not with a shout, but with footsteps down an aisle and a simple apology that changed everything. The soft hum of the engines felt different now, less a mechanical backdrop, more a carrier of collective conscience. The amber glow of first-class lights revealed faces both humbled and hopeful. Owen sat quietly in 3C, hands folded in his lap, observing as the cabin stirred into motion once more, this time not in service, but in solidarity. It began with a clearing of throats. A woman in 2F, her silver hair perfectly coiled, raised her hand. "Excuse me," she said, voice quavering with suppressed emotion, I watched and did nothing. "I'm sorry, Mr. Delgado." Her apology rippled across the aisle. One by one, passengers leaned forward, releasing the silence they'd clung to. A gentleman in 1E, his bespoke suit immaculate, stood next. His voice was low but unshakable. "I'm a lawyer," he confessed, "and I made excuses for not intervening. I judged you by your appearance instead of asking if you were okay. I apologize." He paused, scanning the rows until his gaze found Owen's calm nod. Each apology carried its own weight. Regret, shame, and surprise at their own complicity rippled through the cabin. A young couple in 4A and 4B clasped hands. "We recorded the incident," the woman admitted, her voice soft but steady, "but we didn't step forward. We're sorry." They held up their phones, not as weapons to shame Owen again, but as an offering to amplify the truth. Bridget Sanders listened from the back of the cabin, her heart pounding. Taylor Ree stood beside her, gently placing a notebook in Bridget's hands. On the first page, in trembling ink, Taylor had written, "Silence is no longer neutral." Taylor met Bridget's eyes. "We need to remember this," she said quietly. "If we're all silent, nothing changes." Bridget nodded, tears welling in her eyes. She turned back to the cabin and raised her voice, just enough for all to hear. "From now on, I promise to speak up when something is wrong. I hope you all will too." A murmur of yes, absolutely, and thank you threaded through the rows. The tension that had once thickened the cabin dissolved, replaced by a fragile lightness. Passengers exchanged compassionate smiles. Elderly hands reached out to shake Taylor's, business travelers offered Bridget encouraging nods. Owen watched, feeling a warmth bloom in his chest. This was more than a series of confessions, it was a collective transformation. A flight once defined by unspoken prejudice had become a space of shared accountability. A gentle audience interaction flickered through the cabin's personal screens. Have you ever witnessed something unfair and stayed silent? Share your experience below. Your voice can help others find courage. In the cockpit, Captain Ree Hammond monitored the cabin cameras. He saw each apology scroll across the video feed, a silent chorus of admission. He tapped the intercom. "First-class crew," he said, "thank you for your patience. We appreciate your honesty." Back in the cabin, a retired schoolteacher rose from 3A. Her voice carried the authority of years of experience. "I taught kids to stand up for what's right," she said softly. "Today, I needed a lesson myself." She clasped her hands, emotion catching in her throat. Passengers began to nod, some wiping tears. The cabin's elegance, the leather seats, polished wood, melted away, revealing something more genuine, a community confronting its own shadows. Taylor flipped open her notebook again and read the phrase aloud, "Silence is no longer neutral." She closed it with a gentle snap. "Let's make that our promise," she said, voice steady, "here and everywhere." A businessman in 2C gathered courage to speak. "I'll share that on LinkedIn, let the world know that silence can be complicit." Another passenger, a social media manager in 1D, already typed furiously on his phone. The lesson was ready to spread beyond these cabin walls. Owen leaned back, headphones resting and used around his neck. He reached into his pocket and pressed a small button on the internal QA app, an acknowledgement rather than a command. Behind the scenes, the airline's compliance leaders logged every apology, every statement, every commitment to change. Bridget approached Owen and Taylor. Her uniform immaculate, but her spirit humbled. "Thank you both for your honesty and your courage," she said. Owen offered a warm smile. "We all can learn," he replied, "especially when we admit we were wrong." A soft applause erupted, not the loud clamor of celebration, but a respectful murmur of hands meeting palms. First class, long a symbol of exclusivity, had been redefined as a forum of integrity. As the intercom crackled again, this time with news that the flight would resume shortly, Bridget and Taylor shared a relieved glance. Owen's silent victory and community pledge. The cabin cushions seemed softer, the overhead bins less imposing, and the air tasted of new beginnings. Owen closed his book and buckled his seatbelt, gazing out the window at the tarmac where ground crew prepared for departure. In that moment, Flight 809 was more than a transcontinental journey, it was a vessel of transformation, carrying not just bodies across the continent but hearts toward accountability. Somewhere in the back cabin, Taylor set down her notebook with that single powerful message waiting to guide them onward: silence is no longer neutral. The moment Flight 809's wheels finally rolled away from the gate, the cabin exhaled in unison. It started as a ripple, tray tables folding, seat belts clicking off, then swelled into a collective sense of release. First class, once frozen by prejudice and hesitation, now pulsed with something else: purpose. Owen Delgado pressed his forehead lightly against the cool window, watching ground crew wave the green light. He felt the engine's vibration beneath his seat start again, but more resonant was the hum in his pocket, dozens of notifications from the internal QA app. Each ping marked a new step in what was quickly becoming a company-wide reckoning. In a secure operations hub back in New York, compliance officers convened around a video wall. Clips of the slap, the walk of apology, the chorus of passenger confessions, everything was playing on loop. The head of HR, Monica Ellis, tapped a finger on the console. "Prepare bias-free cabin initiative, effective immediately." Meanwhile, Richard Lane, the COO, assembled a team of top trainers. "We'll roll this out in 48 hours, he declared. "All first-class crew, then second class, then ramp attendants, every staff member, no exceptions. Owen Delgado will join us as honorary ethics advisor." Back on board, Bridget Sanders stood at the galley entrance overseeing the reopening of service with fresh coffee and fruit plates. Taylor Reed moved among passengers, delivering trays with a warm smile that carried real empathy. For the first time in 3C, Owen watched them but barely felt thirsty or hungry. He felt something heavier, the weight of transformation unfolding. Gentle audience interaction. If you've ever been part of a meaningful change at work or in your community, share what sparked it and how it shifted things. Crew members circulated in first class asking for feedback. A veteran flight attendant leaned over Owen respectfully. "Mr. Delgado," she said, "we're drafting new service guidelines. Would you review them?" He nodded. "I'd be honored." In the cockpit, Captain Ree Hammond updated his second officer. "We'll report on-time arrival," he said, "but the real milestone is what just happened at 30,000 feet below them. The world already took notice." Social media feeds lit up, hashtags like #HatFirstClassSilence and #BiasFreeCabin trended. News outlets replayed Owen's silent defiance in the cabin's collective awakening. CNN ran a segment on how one teen's quiet resolve forced an airline to confront its blind spots. Onboard Wi-Fi portals displayed pop-up notifications. Royal Crest Airlines launches Bias-Free Cabin Initiative. Join the conversation. Some passengers still in their seats tapped through the policy drafts, leaving comments that would shape the final program. At 32,000 feet, a small ceremony unfolded in the galley. Monica Ellis appeared on a secure video feed, flanked by department heads. She addressed every crew member and passenger watching on their seat screens. "Today, we witness the..." Satisfied, he closed the notebook and tucked it back into his bag. This pledge wasn't for show, it was a silent covenant he carried in his heart. A murmur rose in the front cabin as passengers gathered around the galley entrance, curiosity and warmth shining in their eyes. Bridget stepped aside to let Owen pass, and the group made way, faces open and supportive. For the first time that day, first class felt like a community, not an enclave. In the cockpit, Captain Ree Hammond consulted with his first officer. "We'll make up some time on descent," he said, eyes crinkling at the corners. "Let's bring them in smoothly." The co-pilot nodded, glancing at the monitor that still displayed the compliance report, now stamped resolved. Back in his seat, Owen gazed out at the horizon line where sky met city. He marveled not at the view but at how one day's events had rippled far beyond this metal tube. Somewhere below, offices were drafting new training modules, social feeds buzzed with reflections, and communities were talking about the cost of silence. A woman in 2D tapped her phone and looked up. "Mr. Delgado," she said, voice warm, "thank you for teaching us the power of presence." Owen offered a modest shrug and a genuine grin. Nearby, a young man, perhaps a flight attendant in training, stood hesitantly. He cleared his throat. I'd like to ask how you stayed so calm." His question carried more weight than curiosity, it carried the hope of someone learning a new way to face injustice. Owen reached into his hoodie pocket, pulled out a small card, and handed it to the trainee. On it were printed the steps of the QA protocol: listen, recuse, report, respect, beneath a handwritten note, use wisely. The trainee accepted it with a grateful nod. High above the clouds, the plane began its descent. Passengers stowed their notebooks, closed their tablets, and settled in for the landing announcement. The seatbelt signs chimed on again, but this time they felt like a gentle reminder: journeys may pause, but principles endure. A final courtesy announcement echoed softly: "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York. On behalf of all of us at Royal Crest Airlines, thank you for flying with integrity today." No stiff corporate tone, just genuine warmth. Owen clipped his seatbelt, slipping the pledge notebook into his backpack once more. He pressed a finger to the window, tracing the Manhattan skyline waking beneath him. The tower stood tall, but today he felt taller, lifted by the collective courage of a cabin that chose to speak up. As the plane touched down smoothly, the cabin erupted, not in applause, but in whispered acknowledgments. Smiles were exchanged, eyes met in unspoken respect. Bridget and Taylor stood together by the aisle, watching Owen unbuckle. Bridget's eyes glistened. Taylor offered a thumbs up. Owen stepped into the aisle, pausing to look at each passenger who had shared the journey. He tipped his head in thanks, gratitude radiating from his quiet frame. Then, with a final nod toward the galley, he disappeared into the jet bridge, leaving behind a cabin transformed. The empty seat 3C remained, leather-pressed but unclaimed, a silent reminder of what had happened and what could happen again if people chose action over apathy. Somewhere beyond those clouds, a pledge was echoing: silence is no longer neutral.